The United States of America did not extend the permit for the sale of Russian seaborne oil under sanctions and essentially reinstated those very sanctions. US sanctions against oil from the Russian Federation have come back into effect. The permit was issued on March 12 and was valid through April 11 inclusive. It has already been 2 days since the permit expired and no new one has been issued. And now some viewers have already breathed a sigh of relief and said, phew, Donald Trump still isn't giving any new concessions to Vladimir Putin. But unfortunately, even after the sanctions are reinstated, Russia will continue to earn billions and billions from oil because Donald Trump has launched another, more dangerous process. The return of sanctions at this stage will not have the desired effect without proper monitoring of their enforcement. And in this episode, we'll break it down together with you. So, what is wrong with Trump's sanctions against the Russian Federation? My name is Alexei Pechi. Let's discuss this together. But before we start this episode, I ask you to subscribe to the channel, like the episode, leave absolutely any comment under this video, and subscribe to my Telegram channel, Pechi News. The link to it is in the description of this video. So, US sanctions on Russian oil have been reimposed after the Trump administration lifted the restrictions for a month. This move will certainly satisfy Ukraine's supporters in Europe, but Russia still has many ways to bypass these sanctions. And importantly, the sanctions themselves were created by Donald Trump. Trump created a lot of mechanisms. US oil sanctions have been reimposed after Trump? Yes. Russian restrictions reimposed. The administration lifted the restrictions for a month. Министерство финансов США отменило sanctions on Russian oil last month. On oil and gas after the actual blockade. The Trump administration lifted the sanctions for a month, either in response to questions in Vietnam, American-Israeli attacks. Sanctions on oil, again on Rosneft and Lukoil, introduced in October last year, really hurt Russia's oil sales revenue, but all of that was wiped out. And right after Trump lifted the sanctions, even if only temporarily, the Democrats said it was stupid to give the Russians any concessions. What was the point at all? Well, for example, experts are sure that it could have been handled better. If it had to be done, well, it had to be done. Lifting sanctions on Russian oil to stabilize the market because of the war in the Middle East, the Trump administration could have at least demanded that the profits from Russian oil under this lifting of sanctions be placed in an escrow account and used only for food and medicine, for example. Plus, they could have officially sharply lowered the price cap on Russian oil in order to reduce the flow of income to Russia. That is, the sale of Russian oil would still take place because the sanctions were lifted, but at a lower price than Putin wanted. But apparently, Trump and his team were so scared of the consequences of their war in the Middle East that they immediately started hysterically and mindlessly lifting sanctions. Let me remind you that besides Russian oil, Trump even managed to lift sanctions against Iranian oil, allowing the enemy to earn billions right in the middle of the war. Now, more than a month later, Trump is reinstating sanctions against Russian oil and starting a blockade of the Strait of Hormuz to block the sale of Iranian oil. And you know, in this situation, I have just one question. Is Donald Trump brave enough to come out and say, guys, I made a mistake? But it seems that even in Trump's camp, there were doubts about it. Until Saturday, it was unclear whether the sanctions waiver for Russia would be cancelled. In the end, 3 Democrats, Senator Jeanne Shaheen from the Foreign Relations Committee, Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer, and Senator Elizabeth Warren from the Banking Committee. On Friday, they urged the Trump administration not to extend the Treasury Department's general license under any circumstances, stating that it, quote, allows Russia and its accomplices to earn more than $4 billion. In the end, Trump did reinstate the sanctions, but there's a problem. This event is not a reason to celebrate. So, many people sighed with relief and said, well, there was a 1-month pause in the sanctions. They didn't extend the pause, so the sanctions are back. That's it. We can relax now. But no, Trump created a situation where, nobody cares about his sanctions and threats, especially since he doesn't control them at all. I'll explain now so you don't jump to conclusions. This 1-month pause when the sanctions were lifted pushed all Russian intermediaries even more to load Russian oil under sanctions, anticipating new profits from the license. Or is it because the Trump administration kind of hinted that it would be willing to turn a blind eye to Russian oil to soften the consequences of its policy toward Iran? So everyone understands that Trump has already crashed the oil market with his war against Iran, and it's unlikely that he will also go after sanctioned Russian oil. Like, everyone kind of understands that this is definitely not a priority right now. And here I want to emphasize this once again. The issue is specifically about sanctions enforcement, and Trump doesn't control anything right now. Let me give you an example, just for clarity. The sanctions imposed last October against Lukoil and Rosneft worked for two reasons. That is, not just because they were imposed. No, there were two reasons. The first reason is the pressure from the US on India, which began to refuse to buy oil from Russia in order not to spoil relations with Trump. And the second reason is the decline in global demand, which allowed India to buy oil from other countries without much damage to its own wallet. So two factors came together and the sanctions worked. At the moment, Trump is not putting any pressure on India. India buys whatever oil it wants. And the market is already shocked by the oil shortage. And now, when the demand for oil is enormous due to the closure of the Strait of Hormuz, it will be very difficult to convince India to stop buying oil from Russia again. And it's not even certain that Trump will do this, because reinstating sanctions against the Russian Federation is purely a symbolic step and is unlikely to affect anything right now. Okay, let's break down this situation on the chart. This is a chart showing the stocks of Russian oil that are stored on tankers and are at sea. That is, the oil that has already been loaded onto tankers couldn't be sold, and now this oil is drifting somewhere in the open sea. So, the effect of those very sanctions is clearly visible on the chart. When the sanctions were introduced at the end of October last year, oil gradually began to accumulate on Russian shadow fleet tankers, and Russia couldn't sell it anywhere. The tankers were drifting somewhere between India and China, hoping that someone would buy this oil. As we'll see on the chart, Russia ended up accumulating 133 million barrels of oil at sea that no one was planning to buy. They just loaded it onto tankers and now it's sitting somewhere out at sea. But as soon as the United States eased sanctions on March 12 this year, everyone started snapping up this Russian oil sitting in tankers at sea like hotcakes and at triple the price. As a result, the volume of Russian oil held on tankers returned to pre-sanctions levels. No matter how much US Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent claims this didn't help Russia or that Putin didn't profit, it's all nonsense. Because Putin, not the legislative branch, was able to sell off all the oil that had accumulated during the sanctions period. And let's put it this way, Russia just broke even. And now those sanctions that were imposed in October are completely worthless, absolutely nothing. They ended up having zero effect. On why the US may have chosen not to renew the license at this time? Well, maybe they saw that the surplus Russian oil that was sold off didn't have a significant impact on global market prices, so there's really no point in extending the permit. And there's not much potential for further sell-offs either, since tanker reserves have returned to pre-sanction levels. And on top of that, Ukrainian drone attacks are disrupting the stable shipment of oil from Russia. And once again, with their monthly permit, even if it has expired, the US has only made things worse. Because tankers will still be loaded while waiting for the next easing. There is already a precedent, and that means it will definitely happen again. It happens again. I'll leave it at that. Share your opinions and conclusions in the comments below this episode. Subscribe to the channel, hit the bell, and don't forget to like. If you want to support the work of this YouTube channel, the description of this video says, support the Alexei Pechi channel. Choose any method that's convenient for you. I will be grateful for any support you can give. That's it for now. Take care. Goodbye, everyone.